Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Soyez les bienvenus. Welcome all. Before we start, few announcements. We have translation from English to Spanish, so please click the language button to select your language. This session will be recorded, so please keep your microphone off. Questions during the session through the chat, please. But don't miss the opportunity to pose your questions. They will be gathered at the end, and this great panel of experts will do the best to answer them. Finally, we just have 1 hour, so please bear this in mind. Dear Pedro, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to this side event where we will have the opportunity to speak about the report you just presented yesterday to the 77th session of the UN General Assembly here in New York. Let me introduce myself. I am Nathalie Seguin Tovar, coordinator of the Freshwater Action Network in Mexico and Redes del Agua Latin America, both member of End Water Poverty, a global civil society coalition. Together and on behalf of End Water Poverty and ONGAWA, Spanish NGO, who have organized this incredible event, we welcome you and all the community representatives that will be sharing their experiences and the challenges of access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. Pedro Arrojo Agudo is for sure very well known for most of you. But for those who haven't met him, Pedro is a special rapporteur on water and sanitation to the UN. So let's begin. Pedro, a few weeks ago, you presented your report on human rights to safe drinking water and indigenous people.
Right.
And yesterday, you presented to the United Nations General Assembly your report on the human right to water and sanitation in impoverished rural areas. Please, can you briefly share with us why a report on rural communities is important in the context of the global water crisis that we are experiencing today?
Well, yes, this year I have focused my attention and my work first on indigenous peoples, as you said, in a first report before the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and recently, yesterday, on peasant communities, impoverished rural communities, and in both cases, these are populations living, of course, in conditions of extreme poverty and vulnerability, which must therefore dominate the attention and priority of public policies based on a human rights approach. In fact, as I stressed yesterday before the General Assembly, 44% of the world's population living in rural areas is home of 80% of the 2 billion people without access guaranteed to safe drinking water, and 92% of the 500 million still practicing open air defecation. Well, as I always explain, we face a global crisis that is as serious as it is paradoxical. The global water crisis on the planet water, the blue planet, with 2 billion, as I said, 2 billion people without guaranteed access to safe drinking water, and almost 4 billion without basic sanitation. But these billions of people are not properly, for the most part, thirsty people without water in their living environment, but extremely impoverished people living next to rivers, lakes, or over-polluted aquifers. In short, we must confront a crisis whose roots lie at the confluence of two critical failures: the failure on sustainability that we have generated in our aquatic ecosystems, transforming water, the key of life, at least key of life we know at present, transform this, which is, into the most terrible vector of disease and even death, ever known. And the failure, on the other hand, of inequity and poverty that we generated from deeply immoral and unjust socio-economic and political models. Well, with these two reports, I focus my attention then on the spaces of extreme poverty that we have generated, in short, in rural areas.
Thank you, Pedro. Well, these figures that you just mentioned are just astonishing. 80%, 92%, not access to water, not access to sanitation in rural areas is just astonishing. These figures and many others are in this report, and I encourage everybody to read these two reports. Related to what you just mentioned about this, the how water is base of the environment of the rural life. You mentioned rural communities usually have access to water through community-led management, but sanitation is still a challenge for them. So in this report, you recognize how the community organization has prevailed and is important to strengthen. So the question will be how this kind of organization and management, when they are legally recognized and supported by the state or other actors, can help to fulfill the human right to water and sanitation.
Yes. Well, these communities depend, and is generally well known, depend directly on the natural network of aquifers, rivers, lakes, and wetlands from which they obtain water daily, and even fish, as very often the key of their livelihoods, in many cases at least. In the absence of public investment in basic infrastructure, communities are often supplied with untreated water from public sources and community managed wells, but also by private wells, vendors with tankers, tanker trucks, or directly from springs, rivers, and lakes. Well, from the information received, community-based water management, typical of peasant cultures, undoubtedly offers the most positive examples to follow. A management approach, not just for communities, rural communities, but also from the case of indigenous peoples. This is an expression of democratic governance. I insist on this, based on accountability and collective participation, leaving no one behind. This is very important. At least 80,000 community aqueducts in Latin America, serving at least some 70 million people in impoverished rural areas, provide an exceptional reference in this respect, and I insisted before the Assembly. That is why in my report, I insist on recommending that governments not only must recognize and support this form of management, but also promoting strategies based on public community alliances, and also promote the use. It's not just a question of recognizing, as is the case in some cases, but the lack of support, the lack of financial means and so on, need this other kind of strategy, building this public community strategy. As by the way, is at present promoted in a new legal proposal, a law proposed by the aqueducts in Colombia, and I think at least in the last time I have been in Colombia, I hope it will be accepted by the government.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You just mentioned public community partnership, which I think is one of the most interesting partnership that we could be thinking of right now in this moment in the global South. They have shown traditional resilience. I mean, they are a resilience model, and this should be strengthened for sure. And enhorabuena, Colombia, and I hope this law will come through and will be the first step for this recognition in many other regions and countries. So thank you, Pedro, and let's share some experience from the ground on the community water management. We will ask Betty Soto to briefly share why this social structure is so important to strengthen and to support. So Betty Soto has 20 years working with water and sanitation in rural areas and community-based management in Bolivia and Latin America. Por favor, Betty, tienes 3 minutitos. Gracias.
Bueno, un saludo cordial a todos. Les hablo desde La Paz, Bolivia, y comentaré algo sobre gestión comunitaria del agua y saneamiento en comunidades rurales de mi país. En las últimas décadas, al igual que en muchos países, se han producido avances significativos con el acceso al agua potable y saneamiento para cumplir con el derecho humano al agua y saneamiento en Bolivia. Pero lo importante es que al mismo tiempo se ha reconocido y fortalecido el modelo de gestión comunitaria a nivel rural, denominado Comité de Agua Potable y Saneamiento, y su sigla es CAPIS. Además, se promueve y valora el rol de la mujer desde su participación en todas las acciones de los proyectos. Se prioriza el desarrollo de capacidades de todos los miembros de este prestador de servicios para que al finalizar la obra, pues estos puedan asumir la gestión de los servicios de agua y saneamiento para garantizar la sostenibilidad de los servicios y mantener el influjo del derecho humano al agua y saneamiento. Existen más de 14,000 comités de agua en Bolivia y sus esfuerzos están dirigidos a garantizar la operación y mantenimiento adecuado de las instalaciones de agua y saneamiento en las zonas rurales para buscar la protección y el impacto en la salud de la población. Sin embargo, estos comités de agua se enfrentan a diferentes retos para mantener la calidad, la sostenibilidad y la resiliencia de los servicios, porque al pasar el tiempo existe debilidad en la transferencia de las capacidades a los nuevos miembros que van asumiendo en los comités de agua cuya vigencia no es más de 2 años, quienes requieren de una asistencia técnica a través de políticas públicas apropiadas, pero sobre todo adaptadas a las necesidades y desafíos a los que se enfrentan estas comunidades a la cabeza de su prestador, para reducir los riesgos y superar las condiciones de vulnerabilidad de los servicios que enfrentan cada día más frecuentes, sea inundaciones, sequías, deslizamientos que afectan a los servicios de agua y saneamiento. Por tanto, es necesario aún que vea la autoridad sectorial nacional el cómo apoyar y fortalecer a los CAPIS, quienes con sus éxitos y debilidades pues son los que permanecen liderando la gestión comunitaria de los servicios de agua y saneamiento en las comunidades rurales. Pero además de apoyar y fortalecer a los CAPIS, se necesita definir los niveles de coordinación de todos los esfuerzos con todos los actores locales para garantizar que esos avances de los derechos humanos al agua y saneamiento puedan hacer frente a las amenazas del cambio climático que se siente cada vez con más fuerza. A menudo estos embates de la naturaleza pueden rebasar la capacidad de las comunidades para mantener la calidad de los servicios, que ellos están presentes en las comunidades y son los que nos van enseñando a través de todas sus experiencias adquiridas para mantener el influjo de un servicio adecuado en el tiempo. Gracias.
Betty, thank you very much for your experience and sharing these thoughts. What you just mentioned about technical assistance and strengthening, but adapted to local realities is very important. Thank you. Let's continue, and let me just recall that you can post questions on the chat, so please don't be shy. Go ahead. Pedro, you mentioned in the report that women and girls spend in impoverished rural areas an average of 4 hours in daily activities to fetch water and eliminate fecal feces from household. Time that can be spent in generating income, go to school, or simply to rest. Women and girls have a crucial role in water and sanitation within the household and experience health issues when menstrual hygiene can't be ensured. Nevertheless, their participation is not guaranteed and even denied when it comes to decision-making on water and sanitation decision in their communities. So Pedro, what needs to change to make women and girls part of the decision-making process in rural, impoverished communities?
Well, you're right. I always insist on the importance of recognizing the role of women and girls, not just women, in this daily struggle to ensure water and sanitation for families and their communities in the most impoverished rural communities. No? And you're right. Even they are devoting so much time and efforts and risks, also risk of sexual violence and so on. As you say, more than 4 hours, I said in my report, you know, fetching water and disposing of feces and so on. Because the time they cannot spend for needs, really, generation of income, school, and marginalization in decision making. This is the big issue. You know? I must precise that fortunately, even if it is so, yet fortunately women accompanied by many men also, it's important to say it also, aware of this unjust marginalization, have been fighting against it and overcoming it. But what I insist to the governments when I address the excellencies, you know, in the General Assembly and also in Geneva, what I insist is this does not excuse governments for assuming the responsibility to promote women's participation in representative, in managerial and decision-making spaces on equal footing with men, but at all levels, and not only in communities, also in governments. I had an intervention in this sense in Latino Sun, no? Where all the presidency, we were men. So it's not just a problem to say at the basic level of communities, we have to promote, to push, of course. And this is a cultural and permanent fight we must promote, you know, but making the example of also to have this equal participation at the level of the government, at the level of the municipalities, everywhere, at all the levels. No? This is very important. I am pleased that quite a few countries raised this issue, both in Geneva and in New York. This is good. And also, I think it was very important that Spain and Germany, in particular, are insisting on the obligation to guarantee menstrual health as part of the human right to sanitation. In all my reports, I always insist on this issue, not only for reasons of justice, but because it is one of the keys to accelerating the pace of compliance with SDG 6. If we really want, I insist on this, when we talk, in UN Water, on the need to accelerate the pace and so on, and say, well, if we really want to accelerate the pace, it is essential to empower those who suffer most from not having their human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, in this case, guaranteed, and those who work and fight the most for it. That is one. This is a key issue.
Thank you for your words, and let's just keep with the empowerment word and the menstrual hygiene need to be included in all the public health and hygiene public policies. So to introduce this thematic as well, we have Candy Sand. Candy Sand is a public health and hygiene promoter, program coordinator at ONGAWA, Senegal, and she will share her experience promoting sanitation in rural communities in Podor, the north of Senegal. So please, Candy Sand, go ahead.
Mon nom c'est Hadi Sam. Je suis la coordonnatrice du volet eau, hygiène, assainissement du programme Gaudi. Et comme vous le savez, le programme Gaudi intervient dans le département de Podor et plus précisément au niveau des communes de Village et de Dungalaw. Et nous intervenons sur l'eau, l'hygiène et l'assainissement. Pour l'assainissement, la stratégie d'intervention du projet s'articule autour de la mobilisation des acteurs, du renforcement de capacités et de la sensibilisation à travers le marketing social et le marketing de l'assainissement. Et pour pérenniser le changement de comportement et consolider les acquis, Gaudi a jugé nécessaire de mettre les femmes au cœur des dispositifs. Ici, les femmes ont été organisées et formées sur les différents aspects de la gestion de l'hygiène et de l'assainissement, surtout au niveau local. Ainsi, des tontines ont été mises en place par le programme et formées. Ces tontines sont gérées par les femmes. Ces tontines constituent des mécanismes locaux de solidarité et jouent le rôle d'institut de microfinance. Elles ont permis d'asseoir un dispositif de facilitation d'acquisition des latrines, surtout pour les ménages les plus vulnérables. En termes plus clairs, ces tontines permettent aux ménages de faciliter les cotisations pour l'acquisition des nouveaux latrines. Le milieu rural sénégalais est confronté à de sérieux problèmes d'assainissement. Dans ces zones, on se rend compte que le taux de couverture en assainissement est très faible. L'assainissement ne fait pas partie des priorités des ménages, alors que ça peut engendrer de sérieux problèmes de santé publique. Comme autre conséquence, il y a l'insécurité que subissent les femmes pendant la défécation à l'air libre. Les femmes subissent des cas de viol, des morsures de serpents, absence d'intimité, problèmes d'hygiène et tout. Mais malheureusement, ces femmes ne sont pas impliquées au niveau des instances de décision afin de pouvoir apporter un changement. Donc c'est ce qu'a compris le programme Gaudi, qui a jugé nécessaire de trouver un moyen d'impliquer les femmes à travers la mise en place des tontines, à travers des accompagnements, des formations. Cette stratégie a permis aux femmes de prendre les devants, de porter le combat, de faire la promotion de l'hygiène et de l'assainissement au niveau des villages, mais aussi au niveau de la collectivité locale. C'est ce qui explique les résultats que le programme Gaudi a obtenus en améliorant le taux de couverture en assainissement au niveau de nos zones d'intervention. Au niveau des tontines, les femmes sont formées, accompagnées et motivées. Ainsi, elles sont prêtes à intégrer les instances de décision comme les collectivités locales, les comités de gestion de l'eau et de l'assainissement. Ces comptines ont permis aux femmes d'être plus autonomes financièrement, car à travers la vente des latrines, à travers les bénéfices générés par la vente des latrines, les femmes ont pu créer des activités génératrices de revenus, comme la commercialisation de produits d'entretien, je veux parler de savon, de javel. Parallèlement aussi, les femmes s'activent dans la commercialisation de jus locaux, la conservation de lait frais, qui est très fréquent dans la zone, et la commercialisation de la glace. Et la question de l'hygiène des menstrues qui était considérée comme tabou dans la zone, à travers les tontines, les femmes sont plus ouvertes d'esprit. Elles parlent de ça au niveau de la tontine. Elles vont jouer le rôle de sensibilisatrices au niveau des ménages, au niveau de leurs filles. Elles s'activent même dans la confection de serviettes hygiéniques qu'elles vont commercialiser au niveau de la zone.
Thank you very much, Kadi, Sad, for your intervention and the work, especially for the work you're doing in Senegal. So let's go back to the report, Pedro. You are very familiar to struggles related to the construction of dams, obstructing rivers, grabbing water land, and all these kind of abuses that the over extraction of groundwater, both for agribusinesses, for exportation mainly, and extractive industry is impacting the availability of water and the dynamic of surface and groundwater, drying natural springs or community wells, where the communities usually access water. But it is also affecting the local ecosystems, therefore the whole economy and the livelihood of communities. So this is exacerbated with the increase of temperature due to climate change, but also deforestation. So Pedro, what can be done by rich countries? And what measure would you think governments will have to implement to guarantee access to water for those communities in the environmental and climate crisis context?
Well, first of all, let me just insist on the congratulation to this example. Kadi, congratulations, félicitations, mon ami. And also congratulate ONGAWA for the works they are doing in the north of Senegal. Well, as I said, both indigenous peoples, and impoverished rural communities, peasant communities, are directly dependent, especially dependent on rivers, lakes, springs, and wetlands, as I said, from which they draw their water supply every day, daily. So the impact on climate change with increasingly severe and long droughts and flooding also from increasingly intense also storms and hurricanes have a much more devastating impacts on them. Well, in recent decades, moreover, many governments so in this sense, I think that the general obligation of the state on building and developing adaptation strategies is even more important in rural areas, but with the participation of the communities, because they are the ones who know better their own territories. So it's very, very important to build these adaptation strategies together with the communities. Well, in recent decades, moreover, many governments have favored, as you know, and promoted the massive grabbing of community lands, including the use of surrounding waters by large agricultural producers under the pretext that these lands were not duly registered, and under the argument of favoring the productivity of the land and the progress of the country. This is the question now, leaving many communities without resources and without water, or even worse, with polluted water due to crops and productions such as palm oil, for instance. You know. On the other hand, many communities continue to be displaced by the construction of hydropower, large dams, no? Under the fallacious argument of developing green energy in the face of climate change. Well, hydroelectricity is not green energy. It's renewable energy. It's a different concept. In the General Assembly, I insisted on remembering that governments have an international obligation to prioritize human rights, in particular for the most vulnerable people, in this case, registering in the name of the communities the rights over land and water rights also, that they have traditionally been the basis of their survival for decades, for hundreds of years. But we must also know that, and this is not well known generally, contrary to the belief that the industrial model of production that promotes land grabbing is not the one, that solves the world's food problem, you know. In fact, peasants and small farmers produce not only produces and feeds 70% of the world's population. It's not the majority for the industrial production. The majority is 70% depends on peasant and small farmer production. And this is not well known. And furthermore, as Via Campesina advocates, peasant cultures offer us valuable lessons to face the necessary agroecological transition towards food systems that reconcile human health, social well-being, and sustainability based on integrated agricultural practices on circular economy. In fact, an agroecological transition that even the FAO itself is beginning to recognize and promote. This is one thing I insisted before the Assembly.
Thank you, and thank you. This figure that you just mentioned, 70% of small culture is feeding the world. Yep. And this is a figure that shouldn't be forgotten. Agricultural system, agroforestry systems are key to actually really face the climate change and all these new horizon. Thank you for clarifying also the differences between green energy and renewable energy. This is the green energy concept is going through a very, very tricky path and needs to be clarified. I hope this report pulled the alarm related to the green energies and of course to also bring attention to the importance of adaptation, but with participation of the local people. So let's keep moving. And now let me introduce Gary Lee, is the Southeast Asian Program Director of International Rivers. He has 15 years experience providing technical and advocacy support and strengthening collaboration between civil society organizations and river networks in the Mekong River region. Sorry. So please, Gary, go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to share at this important event. Given it's 3 minutes, I'll just keep it brief. I want to talk a bit about the Mekong River and the Mekong River Basin. The Mekong River is the longest river, the largest river in mainland Southeast Asia, which is shared by 6 countries. And the Mekong River, like many rivers, are central to the lives, livelihoods, cultures, and identities of more than 70 million people that live in the basin. And like Pedro touched upon, there is a connection there. So when we talk about river or a river system, what happens on land can also impact what happens on the river. And when we talk about the river, it's not only about water. The river provides water. It also provides sediment and nutrients that replenishes the agricultural lands, which are fundamental to many rural people's livelihoods and income. It provides fisheries, which are important and critical source of animal protein and central to nutritional and food security of people. If you talk about the Mekong, it is the largest inland fishery in the world. But it is facing threats, climate change being one, but a key major threat in the Mekong is the construction of large-scale hydropower dams, which is blocking migration for fisheries, disrupting the flow of water and sediments, which in turn is having significant impacts on the rights of communities to access water and resources that are important to sustain their lives, livelihoods, and to generate income. So in this situation, it is critically important to continue to support and find spaces and elevate the voices and rights of communities and riverine communities that do have that critical dependence and relationship on rivers and related resources to ensure their rights are fulfilled. And I do like how this report continues to highlight and emphasize the importance of prioritizing those voices and rights over those other factors and models where the benefits are flowing outside. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary, for sharing this experience. I'm sorry, but the time is clicking, so I'll have to just go and leave the questions and remarks for later. So, Pedro, extractivism is having huge impact in what is called the Global South, extracting all kinds of minerals from Latin America, Africa, Asia. They use and pollute huge amount of water without respecting the human right to access to water of the communities where they extract. Violates the local norms and regulations for their toxic wastewater and leaves rural communities in very precarious context and highly risky situation for those who try to defend the human rights. So please, Pedro, can you share with us what you have found in terms of violation of the human rights to access water and sanitation and the violence against human rights defenders for this report?
Very good, Natalie. Let me just a moment for thanking, very, very grateful to Gary and International River. Next year, I will focus my first report on rivers. So I will need your help, very, very important to me. Well, unfortunately, as you said, in addition to the processes of land grabbing and the new wave of large hydroelectric dams, the power dams, rural communities and indigenous peoples also are increasingly affected by the expansion of mining activities, often in the open pit, which not only destroy their territories, but also they pollute their waters with toxic discharges and tailings that progressively poison the communities, but not only the communities on the land, on the territories, but those who live downstream also, and for unlimited time. To the top of people's legitimate opposition to this kind of project is often met by criminalization, criminalizing protests, brutally repressing it, and even assassinating community leaders. Well, in fact, I have mentioned before the Assembly, the General Assembly, Global Witness has already recorded almost 2,000 murders in the last decade.
This figure is just horrible, and I come from a country where this is happening. This is happening to all the people in the ground that are actually fighting for the human right to water, to keep their land safe, to keep their way of living. So I am happy that you have put this in your report, Pedro, and I really hope this insecurity that is is prevailing in the global South, particularly Latin America, will change soon. To illustrate one of those struggles against mining, let me invite Nicanor Alvarado. He has been a social researcher and community activist for 37 years in Cajamarca, Peru. He will share with us about the conflict generated by the Conga Mining Company and the social struggle related to this. So please, Nicanor, adelante.
Muchas gracias. Se me ha pedido que testimonie sobre nuestra lucha que tuvimos en los años 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013 en Cajamarca, en el norte del Perú. Pues les diré que el proyecto minero Conga está ubicado en la región Cajamarca, 4.000 metros sobre el nivel del mar, en cabecera de cuenca de humedales y de bofedales que afectaría 5 lagos que dan origen a 3 ríos de la cuenca del Amazonas y a un río de la cuenca del Pacífico. Afectaría asimismo la vida de decenas de miles de campesinos que vivimos aguas abajo de estos ríos. El proyecto pertenece a la empresa Yanacocha, cuyos capitales son de la empresa transnacional Newmont de los Estados Unidos. Cabe señalar, asimismo, que Yanacocha ocupa el primer lugar en explotación de oro en América Latina. El conflicto estalló en el año 2011 con una movilización masiva de las comunidades aledañas a los lagos. Esta movilización, una violenta represión que dejó como saldo decenas de heridos y un paralítico que hoy yace en el total abandono. En febrero del 2012, las provincias de Cajamarca, Selendín y Bambamarca y otras del norte del Perú realizamos una gran marcha del agua a la ciudad de Lima en defensa de los lagos. Nuestro compañero Pedro Arrojo Agudo vino desde España a acompañar esta marcha y a proteger nuestras vidas, que estábamos siendo tiroteados por las fuerzas de la policía del señor presidente. En julio del 2012, el gobierno declaró el estado de emergencia en la zona de conflicto, dejando como saldo 5 guardianes del agua muertos y decenas de heridos. La violenta represión y la movilización rondera generó una gran crisis en el gobierno y la caída de 2 consejos de ministros en pleno. Muchos dirigentes ronderos fuimos judicializados y encarcelados en diferentes cárceles del norte del Perú. Ante esta situación, nuestra organización rondera orientó la instalación de campamentos de resistencia en las riberas de los lagos. De estos campamentos, meses después fuimos desalojados con mucha represión. Los ronderos entonces montamos vigilancia a caballo. Miles de jinetes surcamos las cordilleras resguardando nuestras lagunas. El gobierno de Ollantumala, en su afán de justificar el proyecto minero, buscó a peritos. Los peritos hicieron un informe y el señor presidente tampoco escuchó el informe de los peritos que decía que el proyecto es inviable. Es digno de reconocer que el reconocido ingeniero Robert Moran de los Estados Unidos, que en paz descanse, efectuó un estudio paralelo desde las organizaciones sociales de base y el estudio demostraba que Conga era inviable. La resistencia de las rondas campesinas continuó todo el año 2012 y el 2013. En el año 2013, la empresa Yanacocha siguió trabajando a pesar de que el proyecto ya estaba suspendido. Nuestra resistencia entonces se volvió masiva. Ante esta situación, la empresa y el gobierno no le quedó otra alternativa que suspender sus trabajos hasta la actualidad. Pero en la actualidad, el fantasma de Conga sigue vigente. Con autoridad moral debo decirles finalmente, señoras y señores, que sí se puede, que todo es posible cuando uno se atreve a escalar las alturas, que nadie nos quite la ilusión que nosotros los pobres también tenemos el derecho de tomar agua limpia, que nadie nos quite la ilusión que los pobladores rurales de poncho, jotas y sombrero también tenemos el derecho a comer alimentos sin contaminación minera. Viva la unidad de los guardianes de la Pachamama, de todo el mundo. Viva la vida. Muchas gracias.
Nicanor, muchísimas gracias. Viva la Pachamama, viva la vida. Thank you for your words, and definitely death, repression, incarceration, this must change, this must stop. So we hope this report will help to call all the governments to stop this insecurity and this repression prevailing in many parts of the world. So let's go through the last question, and that would be more related to the recommendations of the report. So Pedro, to finish, what are your recommendations of this report to the member states, to civil society, to the private sector and other actors?
Natalie, pero antes un abrazo a mi querido Nicanor. Pronto estaré con ustedes ahí a final de noviembre en visita oficial a Perú. I wanted just to say hello, my friend Nicanor, and to say him that we will be in Peru shortly at the end of the month in an official visit. Well, in my recommendations of this, at the end of this report, I highlight the need for government to support community management as an expression of democratic governance that leaves no one behind. Promoting, and this is underlined, promoting public community strategies and alliances, as I said before. I remind the governments their obligations, the obligation to promote at all levels, as I said also, the participation of women in decision making on equal terms with men. And I emphasize their obligation to promote compliance with the Declaration of the Rights of Peasants. It's not very well known, but this is very important, with special attention to climate change in rural areas through participatory adaptation plans based on a human rights approach, you know. And finally, I insisted, and I insist, on their obligation to guarantee the human right of rural communities to safe drinking water and sanitation as a priority, without excuses or justifications. For instance, failure to comply with this obligation cannot be excused by arguing problems of scarcity of water, while at the same time, the most powerful productive interests are prioritized and they never lack water. And also, I insisted before the General Assembly that it is not acceptable to argue lack of economic resources when these human rights are not prioritized in public budgets, while expenses such as those of the new arms race that has begun are assumed. So no pretext, priority.
Priority would be the word for this report. We need priority to communities. We need priority to local people in the rural, impoverished regions. No, and so we're arriving to the questions section, which will be a little bit complicated because the questions I have are in Spanish, French, and English. So let me just let me share this question in Spanish, and I will translate it later in English. So Pedro, they are asking what kind of public policies and mechanisms governments need to implement to strengthen the community water management, and specifically how these mechanisms can respond to a logic of horizontal relationship between the public and the community. En español, ¿cómo lograr que estos mecanismos respondan a una lógica de relación horizontal entre lo público y lo comunitario?
Well, I think I have said already that the key question is, first of all, to recognize this kind of management based on community-based management of water and sanitation as a good option, as a very good option, the best option in rural areas. First of all, because it is, we need to recognize, that governments must recognize, it's the first thing we have to ask the governments to recognize the recognition of water, the concept, the function of water and so on, as the water as a, not as a commodity, but as a common good. So the first of all is to recognize that this option is the best one, and of course to give support, but not give support as a charity alternative, but a democratic obligation. And we cannot forget that high responsibility, the key responsibility is from the governments. Governments are responsible of to the human rights, to safe drinking water and sanitation for everybody, and also for these communities must be accomplished. So in this sense, this new insistence, this new approach of instead of public-private partnership that we remember, no, public community alliance, public community strategies. This is the way of understanding each other. Communities have their own capacities, their own traditional practices and knowledge, and governments have the responsibility and the means. So you have to dialoguing with respectful relationship with communities and governments through municipalities. Very often municipalities receive very, very short financial means, you know, and mistrust or make aside the little villages, the communities around under their responsibility. So I think it's the last part of the state arriving in the territory. So to build this positive relationship between municipalities and communities is a key issue.
Thank you, Pedro. I think you just mentioned like a roadmap to actually strengthen this public community partnership. And I really hope that this next year, we're going to be talking about PCP and not PPP.
Right.
So we will have, just probably a few last question. How can we accelerate the water and sanitation how can we prioritize water and sanitation in the implementation of all the measure against climate change?
Yes, in general, look, there is something very, very important, and I want to underline this. In the near future, we will have 3 and 4 November, the social forum on water, organized by in Geneva, 3-4 November. You can register, I hope so, in Geneva, organized by the Council, the Human Rights Council. And next year, 23-24 March, the Water Conference, for the first time organized by the United Nations and not by the private. So for me, when I am talking to the governments and talking to the organizers, I say, well, these are very, very important issues, and I hope the movements, the people will come, will connect, will be active in these spaces that is a public space, is the space of the United Nations. But what I insist to the governments is I hope that these events will not be the end of a nice work, but the beginning of a path, of a project that is an agenda, a working agenda, in direct contact of the social movements, the water defenders, not the stakeholders. Okay, we talk with everyone, with stakeholders, but not the water defenders, the people who are women, indigenous peoples, community-based systems around the world, all the people who are fighting really, and with strong commitment with human rights to water and sanitation, this agenda for working on accelerating the pace, because these people are the ones who are most interested, more committed on this goal. No? So I hope so.
Thank you, Pedro. So 2 key events, 3-4 November, register please, and the water conference. And I'm happy to mention that we will be doing a regional consultation with water defenders on Redes del Agua. We'll be doing this in the region of Latin America. So yeah, we will meet there. We will.
And one thing, let me say, 22 March is the World Water Day. Why not to organize from right now a huge demonstration, world demonstration, global demonstration for the human right to water and sanitation, all the other questions, defense of the rivers and so on in New York.
So that's it. We already have one action together to bring all the different struggles of water in this Water Day. I have a last question, sorry, but there is this, hay avances en agua y género en el ámbito rural. Is there some improvement on water and gender in the rural area?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is my question also, and I have made this question to women above all, and the response was yes, it's in the way, and more women are taking the leading. I used to say, as an example, because I knew this experience of the Masawa, people fighting for their own right to safe drinking water in their homes, at the same time that this huge transfer to Mexico City is called
El Lerma Chapala.
No, the one who is from the south. I don't remember. Well, the big transfer. And when the Masawa communities began the fight, of course, the army, police, violence, and so on. So the women said, men behind, in front line, women and children. They made this huge march to Mexico City. And when they arrived, the more strength of the women, crowds, so many citizens from Mexico received them, and the government was obliged to negotiate and to solve this demand. So I used to say, when women are in the front line of the struggle, this struggle, we will win.
Those images were amazing, having this group of Masawas women putting in crazy situation Mexico City a long time ago, already like 20 years ago. So this was the beginning, and still we're improving in the presence of women in the struggle. So Pedro, it's been such a great conversation with testimonies, some amazing persons such as Betty, thank you very much, Kadi, thank you, Gary, thank you, Nicanor, all of you for your work, especially, thank you very much for sharing. I thank you and all the people that share information to elaborate this report, and invite everybody to read and disseminate both reports as much as you can, especially to your governments. Together, we can create a momentum to advocate for access to safe water and sanitation in impoverished rural communities, improve quality of life, decrease rural-urban migration, and contribute to water quality of rivers, lakes, and ecosystem conservation, all by fulfilling the human right to water and sanitation. So thank you, merci, gracias y enhorabuena, Pedro.
Gracias a todos vosotras y vosotros. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a la Rosa Luxemburgo también por facilitar el espacio y bueno, por todos ustedes que están atrás. Thank you for the translation, and thank you. Good night, a good afternoon, and good morning.